Welcome to episode 6. If you've watched previous episodes, you may have noticed a theme begin to emerge, and that is that in instances of healthy voice hearing, that is in non-clinical settings, voices seem to serve the purpose of guiding a person through life. This theme was most evident in episode 3, where the voices heard by those in India were seen as friendly and, well, providing useful guidance. What's so interesting is that this theme was even present in the clinical case we looked at, the story of Eleanor Longden, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia and suffered years of torment from her voices. What changed, however, was when she realized that her voices were trying to help her confront painful memories of childhood trauma. In other words, her voices were trying to guide her down the path of healing. Thinking about these stories, all of which were from the present day, got me curious. Might hallucinatory voices have served a similar guiding function through history? Yes! Okay, so back in the day, in the 4th century BCE to be exact, there was this guy named Socrates, and he's like kind of a big deal in that he founded Western philosophy and all. Want to know something else about Socrates? He had a voice that would speak to him regularly. He described it as something divine and spiritual that he has had since his childhood, which warns him away from doing what he should not do. In other words, it served as a guide. Note also the connection between hearing voices and spirituality, which is relevant because one of the major themes of this first chapter has been that hearing voices is not a pathological condition so much as it is a spiritual matter. Now, we're going to return to Socrates at the end of this video. But until then, did any other famous historical figures hear voices? Joan of Arc began hearing voices at the age of 13, which she determined had been sent by God to give her a mission of overwhelming importance, to save France by expelling its enemies and to install Charles as its rightful king. Okay, claiming to have been trusted by God with a special mission to save France and have Prince Charles crowned king? Sounds a lot like the delusions of grandeur that are one of the hallmarks of psychosis. Except that, wait a minute, Joan of Arc actually did save France and have Charles crowned king? How freaking nuts is that? I want to be clear that I am not saying that everyone who claims to be on a special mission from God should be allowed to carry it out. Not at all. What I am saying is that it could be that if you have voices guiding you, what sound like highly improbable and grandiose fantasies may not actually be as far removed from reality as they appear on the outside. Because you know who else listened to a voice and achieved what others probably considered to be a highly improbable and grandiose fantasy? This guy, Gandhi. Gandhi described hearing a voice from afar and yet quite near. It was as unmistakable as some human voice, definitely speaking to me, and irresistible. And like Socrates and Joan of Arc, Gandhi's voice was there to guide him. He writes, "I have been a willing slave to this most exacting master for more than a half a century. His voice has been increasingly audible as years have rolled by. He has never forsaken me even in my darkest hour. He has saved me often against myself, and left me not a vestige of independence. The greater the surrender to him, the greater has been my joy." Okay, so Joan of Arc followed a voice and was able to save France and get Prince Charles crowned king. And now we have Gandhi, who followed a voice and led a successful non-violent campaign to free his people from British colonial rule. Both are truly amazing feats that almost surely would have been considered delusional at the start. And you know who else heard a voice urging him to lead his people to freedom? Martin Luther King Jr. Early on a sleepless morning in January 1956, King said, "Rationality left me. Then, almost out of nowhere, I heard a voice that morning saying to me, 'Preach the gospel, stand up for the truth, stand up for righteousness.' Since that morning, I can stand up without fear, so I'm not afraid of anybody this morning." So these 4 visionaries who had a massive impact on history did so under the guidance of hallucinatory voices. Now, you may have noticed a religious theme linking all of these stories together, in that each of these figures understood their voices to be of divine origin. The reason for this, which we'll discuss more in depth in later episodes, is that the psychic realm, which is where these voices originate, is also home to the religious impulse. If you are a religious person and happen upon the psychic realm, you are likely to interpret it through the lens of your religion. Likewise, if you're an atheist and you stumble into the psychic realm, you're probably going to come away from it convinced that we live in a simulation. It's all the same place. But back to our four heroes. Hearing voices is not the only thing that connected Socrates, Joan of Arc, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr., as all were killed by those who feared their power and influence. Interestingly enough, the directed killing of those who hear voices actually dates back to the Old Testament, though that's a story for another day. Psst, if you're wondering where I read that, check out the book On the Origins of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes. I haven't actually finished reading it yet, but so far it's pretty cool. Now, while all the examples I've given here have been of people guided by their voices to do tremendous things, sometimes the voice is just a one-time warning to avoid danger, or a friendly nudge telling you to go left instead of right. In a recent blog post, Bernard Bateman, the former chair of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Missouri-Columbia, presents 3 cases in which ordinary people were guided by a disembodied voice. In the first case, a woman was driving in the left lane when a strong voice told her to get into the right lane. Had she stayed in the left lane, she would have been hit by a truck barreling through the intersection. There was no one else in the car. As always, links are posted in the description so you can read the other 2 cases for yourself. The point of all this is that absent a diagnosis of schizophrenia, or even with a diagnosis, but just outside of Western mainstream culture, people who hear voices seem to hear voices that help guide them through life. And it's not just a feeling or an inner voice or an intuition. As Gandhi and others have said, these sound like real human voices. For years, science has assumed that such voices have a biological basis and thus represent a brain disease. But I hope by now you're fairly skeptical of that viewpoint. And you know who else was skeptical of that viewpoint? Our old pal Socrates, who subscribed unquestioningly to the age-old view that side by side with the physical world accessible to our senses, there exists another, populated by mysterious beings, personal like ourselves, but unlike ourselves, having the power to invade at will the causal order to which our own actions are confined, effecting in it changes of incalculable extent to cause us great benefit, or where they choose otherwise, total devastation and ruin. That concludes our chapter on hearing voices, at least for the time being. We'll return to the subject in future episodes, but not until we've taken a look at the other 2 legs of our tripod, spiritual awakening and psychedelics. As I promised at the end of the last video, we're about to start chapter 2, where we'll be taking a look at the darker side of something typically viewed in a positive light. So stick around to find out what that is. Finally, I'm going to leave you with a few of the lyrics from the song Southern Cross by Crosby, Stills, and Nash, mainly just because it's a great song, but I think you'll see how it relates. As always, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.